It's 2 a.m. in Tehran. A missile siren goes off. You'd expect chaos, people running, screaming, desperate to flee. But instead, there's a quiet calm, a strange sort of stillness. Not because the people aren't afraid, but because they've lived through this too many times before, and they've learned something the world doesn't understand. Fear isn't always loud, and silence doesn't mean surrender. Iran has been targeted by the most powerful militaries on earth. Sanctions have broken economies weaker than theirs. Covert operations have toppled stronger regimes. Missiles have fallen. Scientists have been assassinated. Still, the country hasn't collapsed. Still, its leaders stand. This video will take you deep into the reasons why Iran doesn't fear superpowers and why its elite often choose silence over spectacle. It's not just politics. It's not just war. It's a strategy written in blood, ideology, calculation, and endurance. And by the time we're done, you may not agree with Iran, but you'll understand why it's still standing and why the world still watches nervously. Let's begin. 1. The misunderstood power of strategic silence. Iran's leadership doesn't shout to be heard, not the way Western leaders do. They've learned something different. When your enemies dominate every headline, you gain more by withholding than by declaring. In April 2024, when Israel carried out a strike on an Iranian diplomatic compound in Damascus, Iran didn't immediately retaliate. The world waited. Would this be the spark of regional war? 3 days passed. Then Iran launched more than 300 drones and missiles toward Israeli military targets. It wasn't random, it was methodical, and most importantly, it was claimed officially by Tehran. This was unprecedented. Iran had always acted through proxies. This time, they signed their name. But after that, silence. No threats, no bravado. Just quiet, intentional. Iran's leadership knows something the West often forgets. Every word you say becomes part of a strategy map. When you say less, your enemies guess more. And that guessing, that uncertainty, is power. 2. Fear isn't always a weakness. People assume Iran should be terrified. U.S. military power is unmatched. Israeli intelligence can reach into the heart of Iran. Saudi Arabia and the UAE have deep Western backing. Sanctions have cut Iran off from the global economy. So why doesn't Iran behave like a cornered regime? The answer is complicated and deeply rooted in ideology. Iran doesn't see itself as a victim. It sees itself as a continuation of history, from ancient Persia to Shia resistance against Sunni empires to modern-day revolution against colonial interference. Fear exists, but it's not a surrendering kind of fear. It's a sharpening kind. It makes the regime more calculating, not more compliant. This isn't new. During the Iran-Iraq War in the 1980s, Saddam Hussein had the full backing of Western powers. Iran was isolated, outgunned, and nearly bankrupt. Still, it fought on for 8 brutal years. Over 500,000 Iranians died, but the regime didn't fall. And that war, more than anything, shaped how Iran views survival. Today's leaders came of age in that war. They remember, and they assume every enemy is just a new version of Saddam Hussein. 3. The culture of martyrdom and revolutionary identity. To understand Iran's resilience, you have to understand its relationship with death. In Western military culture, loss is seen as failure. Every casualty is a scandal. Every funeral is a question mark. But in Iran, shaped by Shia theology and revolutionary ideology, martyrdom is not defeat, it's glory. It's the ultimate contribution to something larger than self. This goes back to Ashura, the killing of Imam Hussein at Karbala. That story of resistance in the face of certain death is the foundation of Shia identity. And the Iranian regime has masterfully woven it into its political doctrine. That's why the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps frames every confrontation as a spiritual duty. It's why soldiers walk into battle carrying images of Hussein. It's why families proudly display photos of their martyred sons. They aren't just grieving, they're proclaiming loyalty. This cultural DNA makes Iran uniquely difficult to intimidate. You can threaten lives, but they've already made peace with sacrifice for proxy power. Fighting without fighting Iran doesn't win wars through tanks and airstrikes. It wins them through patience and people. Across Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, Yemen, and now even parts of Afghanistan and West Africa, Iran has built a quiet empire of influence, not through occupation, but through proxy relationships. Hezbollah in Lebanon, the Houthis in Yemen, militias in Iraq, Islamic Jihad in Gaza. These are not just allies, they're strategic pressure points. When the US threatens Iran, American bases in Iraq come under fire. When Israel pushes too hard, Hezbollah mobilizes in the north. Iran can escalate without appearing directly responsible. This keeps its own population safer and its enemies constantly second-guessing. Proxy warfare is cheaper, harder to trace, and deeply effective. It frustrates even the most advanced militaries, and in many cases, it puts Iran at the center of regional dynamics without firing a single shot from its own soil. 5. Economic sanctions. Breaking the system, not the spirit, since 1979. Iran has lived under various forms of economic pressure. Sanctions on oil, sanctions on banking, sanctions on individuals. It's one of the most heavily sanctioned countries on earth. And yet, it hasn't collapsed. Instead, Iran adapted. It created underground oil networks. It built local industries. It smuggled goods. It learned how to live under siege. But there's a cost. The Iranian middle class has shrunk. Inflation has crushed savings. Youth unemployment is soaring. The regime knows this, and yet they hold the line. Because to them, economic suffering is part of the larger struggle. In fact, the more the West pressures Iran, the more the regime uses it to justify its narrative. They want us weak because they fear our independence. This turns every hardship into a badge of honor. And while the elite may still enjoy private clinics and imported luxuries, they make sure the public believes the pain is shared, even if it's not. 6. Nuclear ambiguity. The weapon they might never use, Iran, doesn't officially have nuclear weapons, but it keeps its nuclear program close enough to one that the world stays uneasy. That's not an accident, it's a strategy. By enriching uranium to just below weapon grade, Iran signals that it can build a bomb, but chooses not to. This gives it diplomatic leverage. It creates global anxiety, and it allows it to back away when pressure gets too intense. In 2003, Ayatollah Khamenei issued a fatwa declaring nuclear weapons un-Islamic. But fatwas can evolve, and while Iran insists its program is peaceful, its actions often suggest otherwise. The genius here isn't in building a bomb, it's in threatening the possibility of a bomb without crossing the line. This keeps adversaries cautious, and it forces world powers to keep coming back to the negotiating table. It's like playing chess with one hand on a hidden knife. You may never use it, but its presence changes the game entirely. 7. The elite's silence. Calculated survival, Iran's political elite don't always speak in unison. You have hardliners in the IRGC, pragmatists in the foreign ministry, and shadowy clerics in the supreme leader's inner circle. But they share one principle. Don't give the enemy a clear target. That's why, after major incidents like the assassination of General Qasem Soleimani in 2020 or the 2024 Israeli strikes ULL, often hear silence before action. They delay, they calculate, they watch the world respond, and then they act not emotionally, but surgically. This isn't weakness, it's survival. Iran's leaders know that full-scale war with the US or Israel could be suicidal, so they use patience as a weapon. They wait for the moment when retaliation costs less and earns more. This frustrates Western analysts who are used to more predictable behavior, but to Iran's elite, silence is the highest form of control. 8. China, Russia, and the cold embrace of friendship. Iran often speaks of its partnerships with China and Russia. And it's true, both countries have helped it survive economically and diplomatically. But here's the truth. Iran is mostly alone. Neither China nor Russia is ready to fight a war for Iran. They have their own interests, their support is conditional, and Tehran knows this. In fact, Iran plays a delicate game leaning on these powers just enough to resist the West, but never so much that it becomes a puppet. When conflict breaks out, China calls for restraint. Russia offers political cover at the UN, but neither will intervene militarily unless their own assets are directly threatened. So Iran has learned to rely on one ally only, itself. 9. Public anger, private loyalty. This doesn't mean the Iranian regime is unchallenged. Far from it. Protests have erupted over women's rights, economic failures, corruption, and repression. Millions of Iranians, especially the young, dream of a freer future. They risk jail, torture, even death to demand it. But despite these uprisings, the regime endures because it controls the tools of power: the media, the security forces, the courts, and because every protest is portrayed not as civic dissent, but as foreign manipulation. This strategy keeps the regime in power, even as its public support wavers. And the elite, well shielded in their private enclaves, watch, wait, and intervene when needed. Always just enough, never too much. So why doesn't Iran fear superpowers? Because it doesn't fight the way they expect. It doesn't play by the same rules. It has learned that survival isn't about shouting louder or spending more. It's about enduring longer, outlasting, outsmarting. And why do its elites watch in silence? Because silence is a form of strength. Because power, when wielded carefully, doesn't need to scream. Iran may not be loved, it may not even be respected, but it is undeniably resilient. And in a world of fast wars and loud leaders, maybe that quiet resilience is the most dangerous weapon of all. If this video gave you a new way to look at global power, hit that subscribe button. Leave a comment. What do you think keeps Iran standing? And if you believe more people should hear this story, share the video. Thanks for watching. And remember, sometimes the strongest roar comes from silence.